What's up, everyone? This is James Young with jamesyoungphotography.com, and I'm bringing you episode number 20 of Teach Me How to Lightroom. Today, we're going to scale things back just a little bit, and I want to go over my basic portrait editing workflow. And I want to show you step by step how I start with a photo, and then my decision-making process in the edit, as well as my final output. Don't forget, there's a link in the description for the raw file to this exact photo, so you can follow along if you want. If you enjoy these videos, make sure you leave a thumbs up. And if this is your first time here, it would be super awesome if you subscribed. So let's get right into it. So the first thing right off the bat you might notice is that there is already some adjustments made to this image. If you look at presence, clarity and vibrance are modified, as well as point curve has a medium contrast curve selected on it. So you might be thinking, okay, you're cheating. You've already started processing this image before you even showed it to us. Well, check it out. This is actually part of my workflow. Every single time I import a photo shoot into Lightroom, I have an import preset that I've created that suits my needs. Now keep in mind, presets are meant to be a foundational piece of your edit by which you build off of and complete your edit. Now, the reason why I do this is because I shoot raw, and what the camera is going to output is basically a flat file. And this preset that I've created really does one thing. It brings back just a little bit of the contrast and vibrance into the image. Now, it does one other thing as well, and that's specific to my needs as a portrait and wedding photographer. And that's specifically this slider here with the clarity. I do -20. Now, this decision might not work for everybody, and actually it doesn't work for every single one of my photos either, but it does work for most of them. The reason being is clarity controls the overall contrast in the midtones. Now, what does that mean as a portrait photographer? Well, it just so happens that a lot of the midtones land in the edges within the things that are captured in your image. Now watch this. The easiest way to explain this is actually just to show you using the clarity slider. Watch, when I crank this all the way up, you can see here some really unflattering details taking place here. See in the edges near the arm, it really makes the bouquet just look disgusting. Here in the fingers, it just brings out a lot of detail that really doesn't need to exist. So let's undo that. Don't be that person. And on the flip side of that, you also don't want to be the person that cuts down clarity to like 100% and it's like this really milky, weird looking bleh. No, just don't do that either. Don't be that person. So the reason why I decided with 20 is because I have found that that's a good starting place for me in my photos. You see, with my portraiture and wedding photography, I'm currently shooting with a Canon 5D Mark III, as well as lenses like the 24-70 2.8L, the 70-200 2.8L, the 85 1.2L, and these are all really sharp lenses. And I'm all for extremely tack sharp images. However, again, as a wedding photographer, it's in mine and my client's best interest to cut some of that little detail there that doesn't really need to be there. So this is actually really surprisingly easy to implement into your workflow. Watch this. If I click on library and I set things up to where I would normally have them to import into Lightroom, I simply click on import like I normally would. Or when I put my memory card of choice into my memory card reader, this screen actually pops up automatically. But check this out. When you import, on the right hand side you have all these panels. You can rename your files as you want them. That's something I recommend doing. I always put in a custom name and it numbers them automatically. Now here, we have this section here called Apply During Import. This is exactly where you can put your own preset if you know there's a direction you always go with all of your images. So here you can see the Develop Settings label here. Right next to it is a drop-down list. Right here I have a different one selected. This is actually very similar to the one that you just saw. However, it's only medium contrast curve. So you can literally select any preset you have. So I have some color grading presets here that I've created. But I have this on import one that I use for importing, and that just gets me started with all of my edits. Now again, this is simply my foundational piece of my editing. You're not gonna want to apply some crazy preset that you downloaded from some sketchy website somewhere and just totally destroy and ruin your workflow. This is only meant to augment the speed by which you're able to edit your images. I know right off the top of the bat, because I shoot raw, I'm gonna need to bump up the contrast just a little bit. I'm going to need to, as a portrait photographer, cut down the detail just a little bit, and I like to have vibrant images. So once I pull up an image to start processing, one of the things that I do is I zoom in 1:1 and I make sure that my focal point is tack sharp. Now again, I tend to shoot a lot of Canon L lenses. I know for sure that those lenses have a very high accuracy in autofocus. So I know as long as my technique is correct out on the field, those lenses are performing for me at tip-top shape. So here my focus point was set on the flowers here. You can see that the bride here is all blurry. She's part of the bokeh. That's exactly what we wanted in this image. So I've reached critical focus on this picture. I like this picture. This is a picture that I would go through and edit. The second thing I do after I ensure critical focus is I check my composition. Now I am a big advocate of getting your composition correct in the camera. This is for two reasons. The first reason is I don't want to have to crop every single image I take. It's going to take forever. So if I can take care of that post-processing nightmare just by making sure my shooting technique is on point, then that's huge time saved. The second reason is because as you crop, you're gonna lose just a little bit of detail, and you're gonna lose megapixels out of that expensive camera you bought, and let's not waste that. So if I were to crop in like this, I'm gonna lose a little bit of pixels on either side, both in the length and width. So I'm gonna reset that because I'm actually really happy with this composition. I like the way this came out. So just make sure that you're getting your composition correct in the camera. You're gonna save yourself a lot of headaches and time on the back end of editing. So then from here, it's almost a free-for-all. The direction of the edit, whether you go color grading, color correction, black and white, sepia tone, crush your blacks, give it a matte finish, the direction is totally up to you as the creative. Now for me as a wedding photographer, I typically lean towards color corrected, which means colors that are accurate to what happened that day, and or a very minimal amount of color grading towards the warm end. And again, this is because I'm a wedding and portrait photographer. I'll explain. If I color grade towards the colder end of the spectrum as a portrait photographer, oh wow, you know, this is really repulsive. Cold skin makes people look dead. Do not do this. I'm sure somebody out there can make a case for this to be creative, but no. Now on the flip side of that, if I want to make this a little warmer, that's okay, but I still like the color corrected look of this image. As a matter of fact, for this image, I really feel like we're already close just from this import alone. The changes I would make to this image after the initial contrast increase are really minuscule. For example, I might want to cut the highlights just a tad, somewhere around -40, and maybe bring down the blacks just a little bit, but again, just a little bit. Honestly, I think the way this looks is fantastic. This would look great as a print. This would look great as her significant other's wallpaper on their phone, etc., etc. You don't always have to go, oh, super contrast, bring out all the shadows, crush the whites, give it an extreme matte finish. You know, we don't always have to do that. Of course, these are tools in our toolbox that we can utilize as we want to, but I'll just be honest with you. A high-paying wedding client is not going to want images that look like this. So let's undo all those monstrous changes. And now we're back to here, a much more basic or neutral edit. So look, this is the way it came in camera, and this is where we ended up with the edit. Again, this is not a very mind-blowing edit, but if you have a wedding album of, let's say, 40 pages, 60 pages, 100 pages, and you go through and you individually color grade every single one of them, there's a good chance that you're going to end up with a few inconsistencies. And as a photographer, it's really your job to make sure that your final output is very consistent for your client. That's the reason why they hired you. They fell in love with your work at some capacity. So give them your work. Give them your best. The last thing I do when I get ready to round out an edit, and this is actually part of my import as well, because I always do this, because I shoot with the intent to print. Under sharpening, I bring it to about 70. Now, if I double click on amount, you can see here that Lightroom starts you off with 25. And I just bring that thing up to 70. Again, because I shoot with the intent to print these images out, I like to crank up the sharpening just a little bit. Frequently, when you increase your sharpening, you also increase the noise present in the image. So under noise reduction, Lightroom starts us off with 0. I just bring it up to 30. It's very subtle, but if I zoom in here, zoom into these flowers, and I turn off detail, and I turn it back on, there is a difference that's being made. And when you print this thing out like a 20 by 30, I know a lot of people only see images as big as they display on Instagram or Facebook, but believe it or not, large format prints exist and these things matter. Sometimes when it's applicable, I'll put in a post-crop vignette. For this image, I don't find it to be necessary. There is a little bit of vignetting that takes place by shooting at 2.8 on the particular lens I'm using, and the natural occurring vignette is okay with me. One thing you're really going to want to avoid is taking this vignette slider in the opposite direction and giving it a white vignette. Do not do that. Adobe should remove this option entirely. But yeah, that's really my basic workflow. Again, this is a very natural edit, but these are some of the things that go on in my mind when I'm editing, when I'm culling, and during my overall workflow, and when I'm getting ready to deliver a set of images to a client. Well, hopefully you learned something today. I'd love to know your thoughts. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below. If you enjoyed this video and if you learned something, it would be awesome if you left a like. And if you're new here, it would be super cool to see you subscribe. Well, I'm James Young with JamesYoungPhotography.com, and this is Teach Me How to Lightroom.